Now, what I did here is I just wanted to give you a sense of, these are 3 Ethiopians from previous years in their garb and their umbrellas who have made pilgrimage to Jerusalem. They come from all over the country and they are looking out at this promenade that I mentioned, the Tayelet. And the name Sid, they call the holiday, means prostration, bowing, because they're still so grateful. Okay, so shalom. We see that we are meant in many texts to pursue it, but what is it? What is it? Now, yeah, but obviously I'm not looking just for a translation, because I would answer you and I would say, and what do you mean by peace? So keep that in your heads as we move on. So here, pay close attention, and I've made it a little easier by highlighting one word. And it states in Tehillim, depart from evil and do good. Seek peace and pursue it. The Torah did not command them, the Israelites, to go in pursuit of other commandments. Look what it says. Rather, it states in Deuteronomy, Dvarim, when you come on a bird's nest, when you encounter the ox of one who hates you, when you see the donkey of one who hates you, when you beat your olive tree, when you gather the grapes of your vineyard, and when you go into your neighbor's vineyard, what do they all have in common? When, meaning that you're not necessarily told you must go and find situations so you can do that, but if you happen to come across that situation, then you should do A, B, and C. Then it says, though, if these situations present themselves to you, you are given a command concerning them, but you are not to go in pursuit of them. In the case of peace, however, according to Tehillim, seek peace wherever you are and pursue it, wherever else it may be. And this is what Israel did.
I know.
Although the Holy One, blessed be he, had said to them in Dvarim, begin to take possession of the land and engage him in battle, they went in pursuit of peace. This midrash is brought as an explanation or enhancing a pasuk in Numbers, Bamidbar, that says that Israel sent messengers. What does it understand from there? That God had given them permission to conquest. But Israel still knew the message about pursuing peace, so that before they actually did, they tried to talk to the people. So there's one example. Now, we're all familiar with Aaron, Moses' brother, and he is definitely, as opposed to Moshe, seen as a model of pursuing peace, an ohev shalom and a rodef shalom, loving peace and pursuing peace. What's the difference, by the way? Why do you need to use both verbs? Anyone?
One is active and one is passive.
Okay, I would believe that all of us in this room love peace, whether it's familial, whether whatever, but do we, as Marlene says, go after it as actively as others might, okay? So, very interesting. When Aaron dies, there's this response. When Moshe dies, there's another response. Find the difference in the response. For Aaron, it says, all the children of Israel cried for Aaron 30 days. The children of Israel cried for Moses 30 days. What's the difference in those two phrases?
Oh,
All, yes. Okay, now what is that? How has that been understood? The difference, it's one little word, but the Torah does this so often. One little word makes all the difference. That the children of Israel really preferred Aaron over Moshe. Why? Why? And so they were sadder when Aaron died, and some did not cry when Moshe died, so it doesn't say all. Why did they prefer Aaron? Think of, go ahead.
He was approachable.
He was approachable. Fran, you said that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you think of the incident that we probably all think of first when we say he was approachable?
gold.
Yep, exactly, exactly. Now, people have a problem with Aaron. And we're told that he, even though he was loved, that somehow later on he got his justice for agreeing with that. But look at the situation he's in. Bnei Israel are missing Moshe. They don't understand why he hasn't come back from Mount Sinai yet. And that in itself was wrong because they were losing faith in God, because if they really felt that Moshe's gone, that's it with God, they didn't have enough faith. But Aaron looked at the situation and he felt he's not going to achieve anything good by not letting them. He was more concerned about holding them together. And that was a gut decision that he made at that moment. But yes, Fran, that's certainly that he was a lot more approachable. We've said before that Moshe was usually quite distant. Now, and we know that Hillel in Pirkei Avot says, be of the disciples of Aaron, loving peace and pursuing peace. Now, let's take a little closer look at Aaron. If Aaron would see someone acting improperly, he would not go over and rebuke or criticize the fellow directly. He would rather befriend him, pretending not to be aware of his faults. The person would eventually grow ashamed. What would my friend Aaron think if he knew I acted this way behind his back? How could I betray his trust and friendship? Sooner or later, the man would repent his ways. What do you think of that? Aaron acted as if he didn't know anything about the man's faults and just tried to befriend him. Do you think that that approach really works, that somebody is then going to say, hey, you know what? I don't deserve it, but he was really nice to me. I'm going to change my ways. What do you think of that approach? Because we're going to be very practical today and the next few.
No, I think when there's somebody who you respect and love, that you sometimes do things, sort of in their honor and, and to maintain your good name in their eyes.
Yeah, and I think that sometimes that's a sign of respect if you don't you just go for it in the moment and not think back and just befriend somebody without delving into any issues. But sometimes it's just a sign of trust and respect.
Uh-huh.
And I think if you give somebody a trust, you trust them, then sometimes people want to live up to that trust.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's very important, very important. Now, something else he would do further, and we've heard about this. If Aaron would observe two people quarreling, he would afterwards approach one of them with the following: I just saw the other fellow besides himself with grief. He's sitting there saying it's all his fault, and how can he possibly face you again? Aaron then promptly went to the other fellow with the exact same story. Needless to say, the next time the people met, they were tearfully hugging each other, the life or death issues they had been arguing about long forgotten. What do you think of that? Because that's different than the first situation. He has traded off one value for another value. Which truth has, I'm sorry, he traded off the value of truth because he's clearly telling, we might want to call it a white lie, but he has told a lie here. Neither of the parties did any such thing. They didn't tell Aaron, I'm sorry and I'm sad and I want to make up. But Aaron was more concerned about bringing the two of them back together. So another example of peace above all. Now, what are the weaknesses in that strategy? Especially if you read how they've put it in this version, hugging each other, the life or death issues they had been arguing about long forgotten. What's the weakness of this way?
It doesn't work.
It's based on dishonesty.
It's based on dishonesty, but if it brings them back together, but are they really going to get, what doesn't happen in this situation?
They don't resolve what they were arguing about.
They,
They're just
exactly.
pushing it to the back.
Yep. They're forgetting about it. They're not discussing it. And in that case, it could happen again. It could happen again. But his point was, you've got to get people in a position where they're willing to be together and then maybe. And lastly, Aaron was credited for saving many a marriage, for running back and forth between husband and wife, working his same magic. The Mishnah attests that in those times, thousands of children were named after him because they would literally have never been born had Aaron not been there to save the parents' marriages. Avot Rabbi Nassan, thousands of Aarons. Just cute. Okay. Now, Kaminsky goes on to suggest that there are three options for relating to one's fellow. And he calls each of them by a different position: the minimalist, the centrist, and the maximalist. Now, before I share with you, I was wondering what you would think he'd consider minimalist relating to a person. You know, all of these are meant to be positive, you know, staying away from anything negative, certainly violence and disrespect. But what would be the least of relating to a fellow? And then what would be the maximalist and the centrist? To say that two people are relating well, but minimally, how do you perceive that? What do you picture goes on between them?
Thinking that they might sort of just reproach one another and apologize to one another without, going into too much of the issue. And I'm thinking a maximalist would sort of sit down and have a large discussion and talk about the various viewpoints and why their issue was so why it's divisive between them and how they can come up with different solutions to the issue.
Okay, interesting. And what about the centrist?
I'm not sure about him, but it might just be a short view rather than going into the whole issue, maybe looking at a couple of the issues and then leaving it for another time.
Okay, now Bev, your response, interestingly, is all based around that something has happened and they've got to resolve it. So some will talk about it a little, some will get into details. Anybody a different approach to what he might be suggesting? I think what you're suggesting would fit into that, but he's now looking for there to be real peace. And I still haven't said exactly what that is. We're leading up to that, but he's looking for positive relationships between people. But a positive relation can be a negative positive, a negative peace. What do you think I mean by that? The people aren't killing each other.
Well, it could have a relationship which is very superficial and you only talk about light, the weather, nothing of substance, but it's very peaceful because it's not important to you. Then you could have the maximalist position where you would really delve into the things, even though you differ, but you're honest with each other and you work them out. And I guess the centrist position would be in the middle.
Wow. Okay.
You know what?
Anybody else?
You know what? I see it a different way. I think the minimalist position is the one where you see things that bother you and you don't do anything about it, and just to keep shalom by it. In other words, you overlook a lot of things that happen. The maximalist position is the one where you say, you know what, this is really bothering me. I'd really like to sit down with you and talk to you about it. And you come straight on and say what is bothering you, and like how can we work together to resolve this issue. The centrist position is really, it's a difficult one, because I think you're doing something, but you may not always be doing what you really want to do. You're being very moderate in your approach to that person, and you're not saying everything that you want to say.
Okay. Similar on the same kind of thought. Anybody else? Something rather different? No?
I want to say something.
Gloria?
I'm just taking a slightly different turn from what Linda was saying. I think the minimalist position might be what you would call superficial. Hello, how are you? Have a good day. That's nice. This centralist would be a little bit closer, more intimate, involved in the third person. The maximalist would be really there 100%, be involved, completely involved with the person in every aspect that you could think of.
Can you elaborate on that? What do you mean in every aspect that you can think of? Be involved.
It's just like maybe there's something going on with their particular family, and the maximalist position would be somebody that would be there to listen, maybe not give advice, but to be there for them, and the person would feel comfortable enough to talk to them about what was bothering them, more than on a, oh, have a good day, everything's fine kind of thing. The exact opposite from the minimalist.
You know what? I disagree with that, because in all of these cases, you're not really talking about a conflict. You're talking about a situation, and especially when you're talking about the maximalist position. I mean, you can always be there for somebody, and many of us are in many ways. But if you have to really confront somebody because of something that's going on that is really disturbing to you, that's different than being there for them in every way.
Depends.
Yeah. No, I think everybody has said valid, but not really what Kaminsky is going to tell us right now.
He's the
He's
expert,
looking at it.
that's why.
Okay, no. Maybe I should have phrased the question a little differently. He sees a minimalist relationship and feels that most contemporary conflict resolution people are satisfied and call it as long as people refrain from hurting or harming another. That's the minimalist. People aren't buddies, they're not friends, but at least they're not hurting each other. That's minimalist. Okay? The centrist already is you perform positive acts. You actively show concern. You do things. Now, anybody want to suggest what he means by maximalist? You don't hurt. The centrist performs positive acts, showing concern for the other. The maximalist relationship that represents real peace would involve what?
Change.
Interference in someone's business.
Say that again, Rita?
Being someone who makes such an effort that in fact can further the disagreement by the other person interpreting that as being invasive in their situation. In other
Wow,
words,
so you're
minding
looking at
somebody else's
maximalist. You're looking at maximalist negatively.
But I
that he
think there
gets
is a
totally
negative
involved.
aspect.
That's interesting because what Kaminsky says is he feels the maximal relationship that we should look for is when you have, and nobody has mentioned this word, that you actually have feelings of empathy, maybe even love. So let's look at this again. He concludes, after all the research that he's done, that again, most contemporary conflict resolution thinkers and programmers have lower standards as to their goals, that they're satisfied in feeling that, yeah, they're getting along because we've prevented strife, we prevented aggression, we have prevented violence. And Kaminsky calls that, yes, there is peace, but it's a negative peace. Sometimes we use the word cold peace, but it's better than not having any peace. Now, he claims that traditional Jewish approach to conflict resolution has much higher standards. We are looking to not be satisfied with the minimalist and not even the centrist, but to really have peace, then we have to be looking to cultivate positive human relationships or harmonious coexistence. And he says that positive peace aims at creating a sense of interconnectedness. You didn't have that sense in the first two, the minimalist or the centrist. You've got to have feelings of fraternity, of love, and maybe even love for people that you don't even like. Or you have a feeling of love because they're a fellow human being, even if you don't like everything they do. But if you really want to have peace, you can't be satisfied with the minimalist. And he says that the Jewish approach sees aspiring for positive peace as a sacred obligation. And he doesn't hear that in the contemporary conflict resolution conferences. He does not hear that. Now, one thing that he says is missing is they're very aloof also. They don't have commandments like we do, which express clearly and articulate imperatives and call for real character development. Interesting, interesting. Now, when he says that, he reminds me of a debate that I know went on between, do you remember, I don't know if she's alive anymore, Esther Gold? Wasn't she
Oh,
a vice principal
Yeah.
or supervisor at
USPS.
USPS?
A
Yeah.
USPS.
Yeah,
yeah,
a good woman.
yeah.
She and a principal at Associated had an ongoing debate about the way to educate our students. Should it be all ideas and discussion and make it fascinating? Or is there a place for making the students learn rules and give them lists of behaviors? And in these lists, the more traditional school covered all types of situations that the students would be in, whether in families, whether in their friendship groups, out in the world. And it gave very specific, and the one school had the students learn these lists. Of course, there would be conversation. And Esther did not like that. And I understood her, but I also understood the other, because I think we've gone to an extreme in not bringing up those issues and really teaching them, not just as, oh, this might be a nice way, but really going into it. That's just an aside that a vision that I had when I was reading him. Yeah. Okay. Now, what are some of these specifics that he gives from the Torah? First, these are taken from Vayikra, Leviticus. A very specific, but what is behind it? You shall not curse a deaf person. You shall not place a stumbling block before a blind person, and you shall fear your God, I am the Lord. That pasuk is used as the basis for rabbis discussing the issue of embarrassing people, of course, against it. But these two, don't curse and don't put a stumbling block before a deaf and a blind, is taken as a metaphor for not embarrassing people. So each of these 6 or so specifics that we're going to read, he feels are all necessary to guide you and build your character so that you will rise above conflict. The next, and this one's very interesting. 15, you shall commit no injustice in judgment. That's a fancy way for saying judge everyone without prejudice. And don't be quick to just. And we know that we are all guilty of doing that. You shall not favor a poor person or respect a great man. You shall judge your fellow with righteousness. We've heard that in a different context. Give the person the benefit of the doubt. Now, why is this interesting? Why is this so important? How does this help a person stay out of conflict? Yes, we're not just talking about, a judge in a courtroom who has to make a decision, although he can't be prejudiced, obviously. But here, when we're in situations where we're not making a judgment or sentencing somebody to a punishment, but somebody does something and we rush to label it and label him or her. Okay, what is being said here that will help stop? Because you know that when you do judge somebody, you either say it in anger that you've done such and such, and maybe then you're going to be told, no, there's something behind this. Or you leave it, but it's eating away at you. Okay, so why is this so significant in avoiding conflict? He says, Kaminsky, that this is demanding a cognitive process to allow yourself to step away when you feel that you're judging somebody, to rise above the superficial impressions, because that's all you get in the first second is an impression. And you become emotional and you might have distorted perceptions. And that's a very natural thing to do. But if you allow yourself to step away and not immediately respond, then that's certainly going to help you avoid conflict. Now, the next one talks about gossiping. We've talked about that. We don't need that. You shall not hate, in 17, your brother in your heart. You shall surely rebuke your fellow, but you shall not bear a sin on his account. Okay, now, we mentioned this already last time, but more needs to be said about it. Hating your brother in your heart, how do you deal with that? What are you meant to do?
Forgive.
Not hold a
Sorry?
grudge. Not hold a grudge.
Not hold a grudge. So how do you ensure that you're not going to hold on to a grudge? Because that certainly, we see in the next one, is prohibited. So what will allow you to not hold a grudge?
You have to put yourself in that person's footsteps, and that person, you have to understand it from their eyes and try to see it from not your own point of view.
Okay.
I think there's another part of that. I
Mhm.
think that if you do not communicate with the person that you have a problem with, and let them know that there is something bothering you, hate's a very strong word, because very often it's not hate, but it's like we just don't like what they're doing or how they're treating us. And if we don't say anything, it eats away at you and becomes bigger and bigger, and until it grows completely out of proportion.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, when it goes on then to say you shall surely rebuke your fellow. So we've been told already that we have a responsibility, and Rambam told it to us last week or the week before. We have a responsibility to confront somebody for constructive reasons. But what does this line mean at the end? But you shall not bear a sin on his account. What is that telling us about rebuking?
Hatred. You shouldn't.
The way you rebuke. Remember, somebody gave this advice to the sages. You've got to be very careful when you're rebuking. Don't go and do it in a way that is going to be you creating a sin because of how you've approached him. You have a right to rebuke. You have a responsibility. Rebuke But you have to know how to do it. You have to know how to do it. And then in 18, you shall neither take revenge from nor bear a grudge against the members of your people. You shall love yourself, neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. Now, this is V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, the most famous line of Rabbi Akiva. Now, can we love every neighbor as yourself? And again, obviously, it doesn't mean your neighbor right next door, but it's a call for loving your neighbor. And my neighbors, I've told you this before, down, even though I said I'm not talking about politics, or even if, our Arab neighbors, or if there are people in my building that I don't necessarily, but what is it calling for? Why does it say love? Why doesn't it just say respect?
Tolerate.
Go ahead. Who was that?
Tolerate them.
But why would that not be good? I would humbly suggest, Fran, to just say tolerate. Why does it say love?
If you just tolerate them, then you're not really getting to the heart of the matter. You're just letting it sit there.
So Kaminsky would say that's a minimalist. You're tolerating, but what does that give us? Does that give us a harmonious existence? So it depends on what you're really looking for.
But I think if you see yourself as a fellow human being who is also vulnerable and weak and not perfect, and then you share that humanity with the person, then that allows you to love them even though you are very different.
Can you say that again, please? What allows you to love them?
If you share, you acknowledge that you share a certain humanity, that you are equals as human beings.
Okay.
And so that you come from, you may be different, but you're all very much the same. You're creatures of God. You have a humility.
Okay. Now the next 17, you shall not wrong one man his fellow Jew, and you shall fear your God, for I am the Lord your God. You've noticed in a few of these that it ends with do this and remember to fear God. Why do you think, by the way, that they end with that? I think it has to do with what Linda just said. Have the sense that you and I, and then God, Now, this wrong here, you can't tell from the English, but velo tonu is again talking about a wrong in verbal behavior. As you'll see what Rashi says here, and you shall not wrong one man his fellow Jew. Here, as opposed to the same expression in verse 14, Scripture is warning against wronging verbally, namely that one must not provoke his fellow Jew, nor may one offer advice to him that is unsound for him, but according to the mode of life or the benefit of the advisor. As if you say, who can tell whether I had evil intentions when I talked to my fellow in an insulting manner? Perhaps I did so in order to make him feel remorseful and repent his ways. Therefore it says, and you shall fear your Lord, the one who knows all thoughts, he knows concerning anything held in the heart and known only to the one who bears his thought in his mind. It says, and you shall fear the Lord, meaning that's also going to guide you in how you're going to speak. But this takes us back to, obviously, when you're looking in conflict resolution, Kaminsky spends a great deal of time on saying how important communication is. And we've talked about that before. Now, so what is this piece that we're talking about? So I've got 3 words in Hebrew writing there: shalom, shalem, and mushlam. And even if you don't read Hebrew letters, you can see that they all share the shin, the lamed, the mem. What do they mean? So shalom, peace. Okay. Shalem. What does shalem mean? Anybody?
Full.
Whole. WHOLE, or complete, and mushlam, perfect. This gentleman, Gillis Gerelman, a thinker, Kaminsky brings forward as having done a lot of research into the word shalom, going back to ancient times. And he says that this is what he's come up with as a conclusion. Shalom in ancient Israel's thought, world, and psychic life indicates that it means everything that constitutes healthy, harmonious life, the full development of the powers of the healthy psyche. And that's what you get if you're complete, if you're on the road to perfection. And that's what peace is about. Harmony, not something of we get along, we don't hurt each other, but there's got to be something beyond that, and that we have this sense of we're all in this world together. Now, we're talking just about one-on-one or interpersonal, but if you're really going to have a true, honest relationship, and we know that's not going to be with everybody that we know, but overall, any serious relationship we have has to have all these elements that you're looking at the other person as a whole. I'm feeling whole. If I'm feeling healthy, then that's going to enable me to relate to another in a better way. We all know that. What I'm saying now, I'm sure we can all relate to. How I look at somebody else, how I'm feeling about myself, that is what's going to lead to shalom, positive peace, not negative, not negative. Now, how do we deal with there being controversy? We can have peace, but that in no way is meant to say that we're all the same. And somebody said that earlier. And a great example is Hillel and Shammai. And we'll bring up a fascinating point, I believe, in a few minutes. We listen to these 2 paragraphs about them. Nothing new here, almost, to many of you. Although Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel are in disagreement on the questions of rivals, sisters, an old bill of divorce, a doubtfully married woman, a woman whom her husband had divorced and who had stayed with him over the night in an inn, money, valuables, all these were debates between them, a pruta and the value of a pruta coin. Beit Shammai did not, nevertheless, abstain from marrying women of the families of Beit Hillel, nor did Beit Hillel refrain from marrying those of Beit Shammai. By the way, Beit Shammai, Beit Hillel, that means the schools of them. So they had students. So that's what it's referring to when it says Beit. This is to teach you that they showed love and friendship toward one another, thus putting into practice the scriptural text, love ye truth and peace. Now, notice that you're supposed to love truth and peace. Now, do those always go together easily? Not always, but that's what we're supposed to aspire to. Now, Rab Abba stated in the name of Shmuel, for 3 years, there was a dispute between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel, the former asserting the halacha is in agreement with our views, and the latter contending the halacha is in agreement with our views. Each of them says the decision's been made, the halacha is going to be such and such, what I said. Then a bat call, a voice issues announcing the utterances of both are the words of the living God. You've heard this, Eila ve'ela divrei Elohim. But the halacha is in agreement with the rulings of Beit Hillel. Since, however, both are the words of the living God, what was it that entitled Beit Hillel to have the halacha fixed in agreement with their rulings? Well, because Beit Hillel were tended to be more kindly and modest. So why? They studied their own rulings and those of Beit Shammai. But what other question do you have here about truth and peace? What is it about this line that says he's right and he's right? How can that be if it's the voice of God? But God says it, you're right and you're right. And this isn't the old joke. How can that be? I'm asking you really, how could that be?
There are many different possibilities.
Possibilities of what? Be very specific. There's a reason I'm saying that.
thinking like possibilities, I'm thinking of interpretation of how, behavior, sometimes there's different kinds of behavior that can both be positive.
What do you mean by behavior? Because I'm asking now the question, Bev, how can that bot call, that voice say that your decision, your halacha is right and your halacha is right? They're both what God wants. The words of God, the living God.
However,
Somebody?
Bracha, God put the interpretation of the laws into the hands of the people. It was a partnership. He came up with them, and God knew, I'm not going to call him she knew that there were going to be different interpretations, and wanted the people to really examine what had been said and to interpret it for themselves. And she was willing to say, you're right and you're right. And I mean, that goes back to the story of when Moses saw the school of Rabbi Akiva and
Right.
didn't recognize anything that was going on, but it was all correct.
Okay. Yep, very good. And I purposely wanting to end the discussion at this point this evening with making this point. Peace is very hard between people who agree sometimes, because nobody agrees all the time. And certainly peace between two schools of thought that were always arguing, that's quite an achievement, because they felt passionately about what they thought and what they believed. Now, it's not just coincidental that the Talmud tells us that they married into each other's families. But what it's saying is there has got to be a way that people who disagree vehemently can get along, because there's got to be something that's holding them together beyond that. Beyond that. And God has given people responsibility, as Marlene just said, and that's going to be a challenge forever. If we look at this last text, it's an incredible thing. So people have to trust themselves and trust that they are disagreeing with each other for the right reasons. As long as you're studying something and trying to decide on something, and you believe this way, and somebody believes that way, the only way you're going to get to understand is within that chavruta of allowing yourself to hear the opposing view. That's only going to help you really gain true understanding by being open to it. And that's a challenge in so many areas. But that's where you need people to have feelings. Our relationship isn't just based on the fact that we disagree about this, that we agree or disagree about the government. There's got to be something beyond that. But people are going to have to realize that we were all listening to God on Mount Sinai. Listen to what it says here. French rabbis of blessed memory asked, how can both be the words of the living God when one allows and the other forbids? And they explained that when Moshe ascended to receive the Torah, he was shown 49 reasons for one thing and for allowing, and 49 for forbidding. And he asked the Holy One about it and was told it would be for the sages of Israel in each generation to decide. Now, what that is saying is God's living words, his revelation at Mount Sinai, is meant to be heard till this day. When we read the Torah every week or every day, we're hearing his words from Har Sinai. But in every generation, the practical has to be given concern, the practical, and that's what the halakha is. And what this is saying, that God's plan was, I'm going to create people. They're going to listen to my word. They're going to understand it differently. But by golly, they're going to get along. And they're going to have to do this always because they're going to listen to me. I'm always going to be around. And you're going to hear from me and my Torah. But then in your specific generation, you're going to have to get together, guys, and decide based on my eternal words that are still flowing. What is the halakha meant to be in this generation? So this looking for peace, you've got to have that feeling in order to be able to disagree constructively. Because anybody who's part of this is looking and arguing for the right reasons, looking for a truth and for what is best for humanity in serving God. Now, I want it to be clear though, there will always be a need for the people who are looking at halakha. And what is the halakha for this generation? Let that be clear, that it's not saying, just listen to my words and the halakha is less important. There has to be the halakha that is suited for today, Okay, let's stop sharing, at least the screen, okay. Anybody comment?
No.
Very interesting, very, very thought provoking. Yeah.
We all agree on that? Okay, it's very difficult. I know in my family, politically, there are some of us that are at one end and another at the other end. And when we get together, can't be discussed, or you're not going to let
That's
that
right.
keep us from realizing that there's so much more that bonds us together.
Right.
Or to have to agree to disagree at times.
And you do get together.
Well, look who's here. Have you been on all this time, Batya Feder?
Yeah, just I was eating, so my camera was off.
Ah. Can
You
I
know
tell
what?
everybody?
You know what, Bev just said a most important statement. Sometimes you have to end a discussion by agreeing to disagree.
Agree.
I've done that very often with my children because they're of a different generation than I am.
That usually is the case with parents and children. No. But I think that's what we say also. You have to allow, we're going to disagree and really disagree. And sometimes it hurts, but you're not going to let that keep you from getting together. And yeah, you're not looking, if you can talk about it, it's better. But sometimes it's very hard to talk about some of these issues.
Governments are very similar.
Right.
Yeah. I'm sorry, that wasn't clear.
I said
Rita?
governments are very similar. They're from all walks of life, and we have to hear each other. It's the world. We're all human and we're all different.
Yep, absolutely, absolutely.
Probably one of the biggest problems that we face in society today is that people have stopped listening to each other.
Absolutely. That's true.
There are
Sure, I know there are.
impossible. Sorry.
Go
So
on,
there
Rita.
are impossible situations that are beyond love, beyond tolerance, and there's just no way. I mean, one has to accept that. You can't love everybody, and you can't tolerate the sins of other people or try to bring them to your way of thinking. It's just before you can say you have to love or even respect people, there has to be something. And in many, many cases, in real life, there really aren't options for
I
that.
think your comment, Rita, is as important as the comment that I made in talking about we've got to realize halacha is still with us, in that you're being very realistic. You're being very realistic. There's no place for tolerating evil, and nobody should make us feel defensive about not being willing to
Exactly.
tolerate evil. And we're not going to love everybody, but I think we will come to see as we go on that it's not even so much love, but I think it's, Fran said that's a strong, high aspiration, but if you don't put that up there, but we'll have to see more about what that love is. Absolutely. Okay, anybody else?
Thanks, Bracha.
Thank you.
My pleasure. I'm just giving you guys a heads up that if anybody is in shul on December 4th, you will get to see Batya Feder.
Oh, really?
She is representing the Feders at our very good friend Simcha, the Kavori's Daniel's bar mitzvah.
Lovely.
Love Very nice.
Nice.
We're excited. She's coming in for 4 days.
Wow.
Can't miss school. Anyway, so make
Great.
sure she doesn't need a winter coat, okay? Can you do something about that?
Can do nothing about that, Bracha. It's not in our
Oh,
hands.
come on, Marlene. Okay.
And boots and a scarf and gloves too.
Okay. All right. Be well.
Everybody.
Yeah, Nicola. Call
Thank you,
too.
Bracha.
Take
Thank
care.
you.
Okay.
My
Thank
pleasure.
you.
Bye-bye.